Roadside Horrors. Truck Driver Tales. Here are some stories from my time on the road as a truck driver, collected over many years and many miles. Story 1. Months ago, I was traveling by convoy to Iskali, a route I frequent. It was a normal trip. Along the way, my companions and I were relaxing on the radio. We arrived, 5 trailers in total, at a restaurant in Muravadia, Michoacan. My companions got out of their trucks, and I, behind them, saw a 5-year-old boy approach one of them. I thought he was selling pallets or gum, common in that area, though he was quite young to be doing so. I didn't pay it much mind and we went inside the restaurant. The place was crowded, a bus had stopped and its passengers occupied most of the tables. We had planned to eat together, but couldn't, and ended up at different tables. I looked over at my partner Joel to see if the child was still there, since he seemed strangely dressed and was barefoot. The child was still there, laughing. I thought maybe Joel had bought him food and shared it, so I dismissed it. After eating, we left. The boy wasn't with Joel anymore, so I assumed he'd stayed. Out of curiosity, I asked Joel if the boy who was with him had enjoyed his meal. He looked astonished and asked, "What child are you talking about?" I said, "The boy who came into the restaurant and sat down with you to eat." He told me he didn't see any child and that he had been with Saul the whole time. Joel asked Saul if he had seen a child with them, and Saul said no. Joel was curious, and asked me what the boy looked like and how he was dressed, and if he was barefoot. I described a boy of about 5 years old, wearing a slightly soiled white dress, and that he was indeed barefoot. Joel said, voice strained, that maybe it was a son he had, but who had already died, and that he liked to be barefoot. He said people had seen him with the boy several times and asked him who the boy was, and they had seen him smiling. I was sad because I had accidentally opened a wound that was a little closed to my partner. A very strange fact, undoubtedly. Story 2. Once, hauling chicken to FedEx, I was traveling alone to Tijuana. I crossed the Cabarca Zonoita road a few kilometers before reaching San Emeterio. I stopped to relieve myself at the edge of the road. As you know, we spend a lot of time behind the wheel, and sometimes the stomach is treacherous. I stopped my truck and turned off all the lights. With the lights off, other drivers wouldn't stop, thinking I was resting. I grabbed my flashlight and went down to the edge of the road, into the brush. I had only been there a short time when I started hearing screams, many screams of men, women, and children. It was strange because who would be out there in the middle of nowhere at that hour? I continued with what I was doing when I began to hear footsteps approaching. I was a little scared, but didn't give it much thought. Then, 10 meters away, I saw a very tall man, about 2 meters high, coming towards me from the brush. Rather, it was like a shadow with red, fiery eyes. I cleaned myself as quickly as I could, even forgetting the flashlight. I ran out of the brush, pants almost down, grabbing them with one hand. Scared and clumsy, I managed to get the truck started and left the site. When I arrived at San Emeterio, I remembered that I had left my lantern thrown in the brush, but I didn't feel like going back to that place or stopping again at the edge of the road. You never know what you might find. Story 3. When I had a route to a winery in Laredo, Texas, I frequently had to cross the Saltillo-Monterrey Highway. In that section, the CB radio always lost signal and a very strange static was heard. This happened in different sections of the highway. Suddenly the signal was recovered, but in a few minutes this strange static was heard again. The static sounded like people talking underwater. Sometimes I heard screams or laments in the frequency. When that happened, the radio was useless. Once, when I didn't know what was happening, I asked my colleagues for a frequency check. No one answered until the radio picked up a signal from a driver from another trucking line. He told me that he didn't pay much attention to the radio because it always went crazy in that section, and it was better to turn it off. The next day, when I asked for a frequency check, the radio worked normally. I still don't know what makes the radios lose signal on the road and makes a very strange static. This happens in other sections too, but sometimes with less intensity. It's something I can't understand. Story 4. This happened before I joined my current company. I used to work for a refrigerated transport company, and I was leaving the coast of Hermosillo, Sonora, heading to Nogales, Sonora, to drop off a thermo remote loaded with sand. Then I would pick up an empty thermo remote to return to the coast of Hermosillo for more sand. That was my routine for 2 weeks. Once, driving on Highway 15, Mexico-Nogales, before getting to Santa Ana, I was driving normally when I saw a trailer loaded with pigs ahead of me. I didn't see anything strange until I got closer, when something at the top of the trailer caught my attention. Something was climbing on it, to the right. I don't know if it was a shadow or a real human, but it looked strange. This humanoid being, with pale skin and dressed in black, was bothering the pigs. The animals acted scared, piled together with a small space between them and the thing chasing them, hanging in the trailer cage and trying to grab them. Thinking it was a thief, I honked my horn, but it did nothing. The thing kept trying to reach a pig. When I flashed my lights, it turned towards me with ugly red eyes and a macabre smile. A smile I will never forget. Despite that, it remained locked in the cage trying to reach one of the animals. I contacted the truck operator on the radio and he told me to get away and not let the cars behind us pass. We warned the other drivers to come closer because the colleague was going to maneuver. With a clear path, he began to move the trailer violently to try to knock the being off. But the more he maneuvered, the more the thing clung to the cage. Then, out of nowhere, the being jumped to the edge of the road and ran at great speed. I told my colleague that the CCR was no longer on the trailer. He asked me who it was, and I just said it was a simple thief. I didn't tell him what it was because he would think I was crazy or on drugs. I still wonder what that being was that got on the trailer trying to take a pig. Maybe it was a witch, a nawal, a shadow. I will never know exactly what I saw. Story 5. This happened almost a month ago when I covered a route from Hermosillo to Cotitlan, Izcalli. Lately, the company I work for has given me several routes. I don't have a defined route like the other drivers since I cover for rests, vacations, and disabilities. I left Hermosillo at night, and everything was going smoothly and calmly. I had rested a bit that day and my goal was to drive almost all night and sleep in Navajo at dawn. Crossing Guaymas, I went a little into the port to get dinner and then continue on my way. Crossing in Empalm, 2 colleagues flashed their lights at me, so I used the CB radio to ask what was happening, but only static was heard. It didn't seem strange to me because since I had left Hermosillo I had hardly heard anything on the radio, since the communication was very distorted. I thought I had a fault in the lights and stopped to see if something was wrong with my trailer. I got down, checked the unit, lights, etc. There was nothing strange, so I decided to continue. Leaving Empalm, a few kilometers later I saw a white bag in the distance that moved in a curved shape as if it were a person. As I approached the bag, I realized that it was like an old woman who was walking on the edge of the road. I started to feel nervous because it was weird to see a person at the edge of the road at that time of morning. I kept watching to see what the old lady was doing. I thought she was going to cross in front of me or maybe do something to make me lose control. As I got very close to her, I realized that her feet were not touching the ground. The old lady was floating. Waiting for what she was going to do, I gripped the steering wheel. But that was not so, since the old lady entered a kind of pantheon that was on the edge of the road. And just when she entered it, she vanished. I got very excited as always when these situations happened to me. I thought that maybe they were my hallucinations, but I didn't even feel tired. And a hallucination of this type would already be weird. I continued on my way, turning the matter around in my head. Almost arriving at BK, I began to get very tired and sleepy. Something weird because, as I mentioned, I had rested very well that day. I had even slept a few extra hours. It could also have happened that dinner made me sleepy. With that sleepiness, I wouldn't get to Navajo as I had proposed, so I stayed in Ciudad Obregón. I parked my trailer in a gas station and went to sleep. I didn't set any alarms because I was tired and I thought I was going to rest as much as I could. So I fell asleep. I don't know how long I had slept when I suddenly started feeling uncomfortable. I started moving a lot in the sleeper. Dinner couldn't have been the one that caused all this because it didn't even hurt my stomach. I settled down to see if I could sleep now when I suddenly started hearing a whisper. I never knew what it said. It was a clear whisper, but I didn't understand anything. It was as if I was speaking another language. Somehow I fell asleep again and, a minute later, I started to feel as if I was short of air. I opened my eyes and the first thing I saw was something very horrible that I had never seen before. Above me was a very horrible woman with a face full of wrinkles. Her hair was long and very black and her eyes were totally black. I couldn't see any white. She also had my mouth open and, on the woman's mouth, there was a white light coming out of my chest, as if she was feeding on me. Immediately I started to say rude things and the thing left. It disappeared at that very moment and I was very scared and nervous. What came to finish me off was that I had forgotten to turn off the CB radio and I left it at full volume. When the signal recovered, it began to beep the call from another truck that was trying to communicate with me. I got so scared that I jumped up and, tired, left that place as fast as I could. It had only been 2 hours since I had stopped to rest in the gas station. I arrived in Navajo and I didn't want to sleep because I was afraid that woman would come out again. I even took off the backlight from the rosary I was wearing and put it on to sleep. Fortunately, nothing happened. I still wonder what happened that night, if the one who appeared to me hurting me in the trailer room was that old woman I see on the road, or simply a nightmare. Story 6. This story is from when I just started working at a company called TUM. Before this, I worked at a refrigerated transport company and traveled almost the entire Mexican Republic and part of the United States. I left there because I suffered an attack by organized crime in a municipality of Sinaloa. I entered this new company, and it was a great change for me because I was used to working on the road. In my new stage, I was going to work as a backyard operator. My schedule was heavy, 12-hour shifts from 6 in the afternoon to 6 in the morning. I had to be at a supplier plant in Foreign Hermosillo. I carried my trailer full of material to Foreign Hermosillo and later used a loader to unload said material. It was going to be a big change, something difficult to adapt to. In those days I had a lot of free time since, when I arrived at the supplier plant, the landing staff of that plant took up to an hour and a half to load me. I usually went to the yard of the plant to sleep or rest listening to music. At that time it was very hot. Even 2 days before that event the temperature had risen to 52 degrees Celsius. The environment was very hot, so, when I got to the yard to sleep for a while, I turned on the climate control in my trailer. I also put some cardboard in the windows to help the cabin cool faster. The truck I brought was from the yard and they are commonly called burritos. These don't have a bed, and you have to figure out how to get comfortable to rest for a while. I turned on the radio, put on music, and closed my eyes intending to sleep for a moment while my box was ready. I was lying around half an hour when I suddenly felt like someone climbed up one of the steps, and suddenly the truck started to move abruptly. I woke up believing that someone was bothering me. I went downstairs with my flashlight, looking around, but there was no one. I went up again and lay down, and then I heard a whisper like that of a woman. She told me something like she wanted me to leave that place. At that moment, I felt a chill that ran through my skin and I began to feel threatened. I didn't understand why, I hadn't even seen anything. Also, the patio where I was closed, and there was nothing to attack me. When I got out of the seat, the trailer cabin was very cold. That was impossible since the climate control of the unit did not cool down that way. In addition to the fact that there was a lot of heat, but I felt a cold that was killing me to the bones. I chose to change places, and when I was removing the cardboard from the windows, I felt as if someone had stopped above the roof of the truck. I didn't want to dwell on it because I felt that I was self-suggesting. But when I removed the cardboard from the windshields, I saw a girl about 7 years old. She was wearing a white suit with long sleeves with frills at the end of each sleeve. She had long and very black hair with her arms open. It looked like she was sliding through the trunk of the truck like it was a slide. I was a little paralyzed because what I had seen seemed very real. It didn't look like the typical shadow. Since I was getting over the shock of seeing this girl, I went down again with my flashlight, but there was nothing. If it had been a real girl, I would have seen where she had run, and if she had stayed in that place. Also, it didn't make sense that a girl would be in the middle of the night at a nailing plant where access to minors is restricted. Thinking about it made me more scared, and I went to the hook ramp. My box was ready, so I got on to go and get some rest for a moment. I started my way out to the outskirts, a road of about 15 minutes. The journey is quite short since there are a couple of tunnels that speed up the process. When I was on my way, before I got to the tunnels, there was a kind of mountain where there was a lot of weeds. Suddenly I turned. I don't know why I turned at that exact moment, but I could see a girl saying goodbye to me, shaking her hand. The worst thing was that the face of that girl was scarred and resembled the face of an old woman. It was like I was choking to death. I got really scared and just accelerated because I panicked. I thought I was going to keep going or something, but my reaction was just to accelerate. I arrived at Ford, unloaded the box and went to the plant to wait for the other box, and my sleep was gone. So I went to the rest area of operations where there were benches and coffee to wait for the next load. That night I did not return to the patio. Some days passed, and in that rest area there were other operators talking about paranormal experiences. I took advantage of my opportunity and told them this same story, and they told me, "Have you not heard about the famous girl from the park?" I told them no, that I had never heard of her. That girl appears a lot around here. Everyone talks about her. I find it strange that you haven't heard anything. I told them that I had been working there for a short time, and they told me the story of that girl. It turns out that the story goes back to between 2004 and 2005, years in which the park of this plant was being built. There were many workers working in the construction, and a lady was going to sell lunches. That lady always took her daughter because she had nowhere to leave her or anyone to take care of her. The girl would go to play and she was lost for hours, but she always came back when the lady left the site. But one day, the girl went to play and never came back. The lady called the authorities and started the searches, but with negative results. A few days later, one of the workers found a small corpse near the river. The authorities were warned, and it turned out to be the corpse of the lady's daughter who sold the lunches. They had abused her and had left the corpse by a nearby river. Today, the company patios are in that place. It is said that, when they were preparing the ground, they found a cross with the name of Clarita, and that many paranormal things are lived in the offices and in the patios. When I first got to the place, for obvious reasons, I didn't know about the girl's story, but I have to admit that I did feel a very heavy atmosphere in the park. Story 7. Months ago I worked in a refrigerated transport company. I had no defined route, so I traveled practically throughout the Mexican Republic and parts of the United States. This time I had to go to Campeche and cross the Mexico-Veracruz highway. I was resting at a service station and asked a colleague how the road was in that direction. He told me I was fine but to not stop for any reason because there were assaults in those places, and that they were killing drivers who resisted. I was a little afraid to cross there, so the whole journey was defensive. I was very attentive to everything happening around me. That night everything went smoothly and the so-called mistreatment summits were passing by. It's a somewhat dangerous road, with curves and downhills. Suddenly, in a section that goes from Orizaba, I saw a very old model bus coming in the opposite direction. The most curious thing about this is that the light of the driver's cabin was on, but no one was sitting in the seat. As I'm mentioning, the bus was driving by itself. I contacted the other trucks that were coming after me to ask if they had seen the bus that passed without a driver. The only thing I got were jokes and insults, so I better turn off the radio. I thought it was part of my detour and fatigue to see these weird things, although it did make me a little strange. That night there was not much traffic and the road was very quiet, even the atmosphere did not feel heavy. I kept driving and, approximately a kilometer behind me, what seemed to be a bus came behind me. I was changing lights, so I assumed it was in a hurry. I didn't drive so fast since I had a lot of weight in the box, so I let it pass. This bus had the same characteristics as the bus I had seen a kilometer behind in the operator. It was a Dina bus of the old ones with visible damage to the body. That bus was going at a very fast speed and was going over everything that was in front of it. It was weird and, meters later, I could see that the truck got off the road and crashed. It was a shocking scene. I went to that place where the bus had crashed and got off the unit. At first glance there were no signs of braking. As I could, in the darkness of the night and with my flashlight in hand, I approached the place where the bus had fallen. At the same time that I was heading, I felt a chill that passed through my body and I still felt a very heavy vibration in the environment. But no matter how much I looked, I could not see anything. There were no remains of bus, no smoke, no twisted iron, there was absolutely nothing. That's when I got scared because nothing had even happened on the site. I was a little upset with myself because I felt that all that was a product of my imagination. I returned to the truck and, while I was doing it, I heard very clearly some cries asking for help and cries. Thinking that maybe there were injured people in the place and I had not seen them, I returned with my lamp. I focused with my lamp towards the ravine but no one was seen. I shouted if there was anyone there but I did not receive any response. I got out of the place again and was about to get on my truck when I saw two humanoid-looking, very dark and black shadows approaching me quickly. They were walking, floating. I got scared and, as I could, I turned on the truck and left the site. I arrived at Orizaba, at a service station, to load diesel and have a coffee, and it was around 2 in the morning. A colleague came to join me for coffee and I told him my story. And he told me the following: "I'll tell you what happened, but I don't want you to be scared." I told him no, that nothing happened. He said that, many years ago, in that place where I stopped, a bus crashed with many people on board and that there were no survivors. The operator ran out of brakes and, to save the passengers, entered what seemed to be a braking ramp. But that ramp was incomplete and, in the end, it was the ravine. And that's where the bus ended. Believe me, when he told me this, I got a cold shoulder like when I was in the place. And then he told me that a lot of people appear in that place and that sometimes you can even see the ghost bus. This is one of the many experiences that have occurred to me on the road. Story number 8. Once, I went to El Paso, Texas to leave frozen products. I left Hermosillo, Sonora, and the route was to cross part of Chihuahua. A person accompanied me since they wanted to take advantage of the trip to cross the United States for shopping. Relatively, I felt very comfortable since it was a trip that I was not going to make alone, and at least I had someone to talk to on the road. We crossed from Sonora to Chihuahua through the port of San Luis. There we ran into an accident, something ugly and shocking that somehow left us thinking all day. We continued with Chihuahua, and the day went by with total tranquility. It was not very late to think that something strange could happen to us. Suddenly, the person who came with me began to ask me if he had seen strange things on the road. I answered yes and told him about some things that had happened to me at work and since I was a boy. When I arrived at Esperanza town, almost arriving at Juarez City, in the middle of the road, a person was coming in a bicycle. This person was coming from here to there as if they were in a state of intoxication. I was driving at a very high speed in my truck and almost went to the limit. Not out of irresponsibility, but rather I do this on roads that represent a risk for me to be assaulted. With that speed, it is unlikely that someone wants to stop me to attack my person or the cargo that I could transport at that moment. I could see that person in the middle of the road, fumbling. I changed lights and I activated the cornet, but nothing. Trying to make a lane change was no longer possible, since I was going to hit another trailer, and hitting the wheel was not an option, since here I was going to compromise the integrity of the person who accompanied me, my integrity and the damage it was going to cause. I was no longer going to be able to stop the truck, so I activated the cornet for the last time and nothing. The person did not leave. My God, forgive me. These were my last words when I passed him over with my 18 tires. I clearly heard the impact and how my tires passed over the body of this person. The person who was accompanying me that night entered into a nervous crisis, which infected me and I got very bad and panicked. I no longer stopped because of fear. Until that moment, my sense of responsibility was lost. I was scared. I could no longer stop and decided to stop later in a gas station. While my companion was crying non-stop, I managed to calm down so as not to be very obvious. I went to check my truck from the portable to the trailer with my flashlight. I lit the bottom part trying to find remains of this person, whether it was hair, skin, blood, etc. But there was nothing under the portable or the box. It has happened to me that sometimes animals have been run over and there are remains of them in the tires or in the chassis. In addition to that, this stinks very ugly. It was very strange to me and, anyway, if there had been any remains or something similar, the authorities would have gone to answer for the facts. But since there was absolutely nothing, I decided not to go. When I was about to leave the place, a person approached me from the one that serves one of the gas station pumps. I was still afraid that he would tell me something about the event. He told me, "What happened to you, boss?" I answered him that nothing. Why did he ask me that? He insisted, "Sure nothing happens to him?" I answered seriously that nothing happened. "You took the drunkard, right?" He told me. I answered that I did not know what he was talking about. Then this person tells me, "Look, boss, it's not the first one to stop here to check if someone has run over someone. Some get off and start washing the tires of the truck. Others call the police. It's fine and they don't do anything. What you saw was a horror." That was a person who liked to go drunk to Esperanza. At night he went back to Juarez in the dark with his bicycle. He was very lucky because nothing happened to him. One of those days a truck took him and killed him. Since then he appears to make you get out of the road and have an accident. When he told me this I was surprised because everything had been so real. I even felt like the tires had passed over him. I thanked him for what he said and I left the place. I told him that what happened was a ghost to the person who accompanied me that night, and he immediately fainted. From there, that person believes in ghosts, and it's an experience we'll never forget.